viewers and listeners, welcome to yet another episode of The Conversation. My name is Untitled Chapter and I'm your host. And today I'm excited to have Benjamin Sovacool, who is a professor of energy policy at the Science Policy Research Institute at the University of Sussex Business School in the United Kingdom. Today we are set to discuss his article, The Political Economy of Cobalt Mining in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Professor Benjamin, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. I'm very much happy to have you for this show, and you are very much welcome on the platform. So I do have some questions for you with regards to the article, but before we get to start the discussion on that, can you just briefly describe the work that you do with the two organizations that you had? I understand that you are the director of the Center for Innovation and Energy Demand, as well as the Sussex Energy Group. Can you just briefly describe the work that you do as director with these two organizations?
Sure, happy to. So here at the University of Sussex, we have a very large interdisciplinary energy group, more than 60 full-time faculty, and that's not even counting students, that look at energy issues. And we do some from a very multidisciplinary lens, using geography, anthropology, sociology, political science, economics, and engineering. So it's a real pleasure to direct that group because we're able to really tackle energy issues with a rich bag of perspectives and approaches. And then my other role, although it's winding down, is we had a 5-year center here called the Center on Innovation and Energy Demand. And we were looking at many new energy innovations, things like smart meters or electric vehicles, and trying to better understand all of the social aspects. And included in those social aspects were things like justice and vulnerability, which is what we'll talk about in a little bit today. So it was quite fun to direct that center as well. It was a 5-year center with about 30 people that covered many different technologies across energy demand.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much for that. So I just want you to tell me briefly about your experiences in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I understand that this is where you carried out your field research. From the article, you mentioned that you had the opportunity to visit about 21 mines in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. That was very comprehensive. That was very rigorous. And thank you very much. I very much enjoy reading this paper. So I do really want you to give us a brief description of your experiences with research in these mines. What did you see? What were the people's responses? And how was the experience?
Let me unpack that. So obviously the first thing I should say is the ability to travel to the Congo and to visit all of these mines is not easy. It's very expensive, especially for someone coming from Europe. So we were very lucky to win a grant from the European Commission for a project called INNOPaths, which stands for Innovation Pathways for Decarbonization. And that project has within it tasks, which I'm leading, which were supposed to look at the justice implications of energy transitions. And in our research, we came across people who were talking about these rumors about Chinese involvement in the Congo, child labor in the Congo, and the environmental destruction of the Congo. So it was very lucky that we had the resources to actually do a study, because I know a lot of researchers don't. They only do stuff on their desk, or getting money to travel to the field is quite hard. So we're very thankful for INNOPaths. The second thing I should say is it was quite a rigorous research design, and it wasn't just me. I really had the benefit of partnering with local Congolese researchers, especially at the University of Lubumbashi. And there were about 10 of us, which is why we were able to visit so many mines and why we were able to collect so much data. You know, I had the privilege of having 5 research assistants who were all Congolese, as well as a driver and a professor at the university who helped us get our clearances and permissions and all that. So I don't want to kind of make it seem like it was only me all by myself. There was a whole team behind me to support the research, which I never would have been able to do without local involvement, especially for someone from the West like me who doesn't speak the language. I don't even speak French. which is the language you need to get around
Exactly. Yeah.
large parts of the Congo. So I'm very thankful to the University of Lubumbashi for hosting me. To the crux of your question, I think in some ways, I'm not an expert in the Congo, and I'm not an expert in mining. So for me, coming as an outsider had a lot of advantages because I was able to kind of see things as someone truly new to the area would. Maybe I'm less sensitized to some of the things that other kind of seasoned researchers in the Congo might see. And I remember what struck me, obviously, was how different the Congo is from other sub-Saharan African countries. I've been to Ghana, and I've done research in Ethiopia and Tanzania. The Congo is a whole other regime. It is struggling with extremely high rates of poverty. You have extremely high rates of disease epidemics, HIV, AIDS, even Ebola, and it is far more securitized and corporatized than many of the other places that I've been. So the first thing that I remember about the Congo is just, the levels of corruption. Even at the airport, when I'm checking into the country and I'm passing my passport to the inspector, he's asking me for $5 to give the passport back.
Oh my God.
And then it just goes on from there. Someone rushes to take my bags and then charges me for it, even though I didn't ask. Even at the grocery store, where I would go shopping for groceries and I would give them cash and they would not give me change.
Oh.
So it's just I think it's a different environment where everyone is so, you can use different terms. They're so chronically poor, or that they're so opportunistic. They see every transaction with a foreigner as an opportunity to make money. And that does get very wary because you always feel like you're getting taken advantage of. And the second thing that I noted, even at the airport, was just the securitization of the entire area. This part of the Congo is very well governed insofar as it has things many other parts of the country don't. Reliable electricity access, fairly good roads, good mobile phone coverage, drinkable water, right? I was able to eat at McDonald's. I was able to go shop at a Carrefour grocery store, right? These are amenities that most people in the Congo don't have access to. And so away, it's like a gold mine for the Congo, where a lot of international firms have set up operations, and the Chinese have also invested very heavily. But because of that, because of all this expensive infrastructure, and the fact that you see trucks full of cobalt, trucks full of copper, or going the other way to the mines, tanker trucks full of acid, which are going there to actually deliver stuff to dissolve rock to help extract copper and cobalt, because there's so much precious infrastructure. And because I think 80% of the government's mining revenues currently come from this area of the Congo, it's completely securitized. There are military, police, secret service, and even just militia and mining police everywhere. So everywhere you look, there are guns. Everywhere you look, there are soldiers. Everywhere you look, there's just security, checkpoints. I think to get from the airport to my hotel where I was staying took 5 checkpoints. And of course, at each checkpoint, you have to pay a little bit to get through. So the kind of corruption and the securitization and the militarization of mining are the first 2 things that kind of just any observer, I think, sees. And I think the final thing that I remember is the Chinese.
Yeah.
The very strong involvement of Asian Chinese entrepreneurs and financiers. And even at the airport, I remember I was waiting in line for about an hour to get through. Where a plane lands, about 10 Chinese people get off, and they're able to cut right in front of me. They're given special treatment all the way to the front of the line, all the way to have these porters, all the way to a special bus, off they go. And I'm still sitting there in line, like, what just happened? And you can see they had their own inspector who spoke Chinese, and they even were serving them tea, green tea, at the airport. So you can already see culturally how much the Congo is really trying to make the Chinese investors be very comfortable, giving them very special treatment. And you see this all throughout Lubumbashi and Kolwezi. You see, I'd say 1 out of every 5 people you see is Chinese. You see Chinese shops, Chinese restaurants. You see Chinese goods and services. And again, you see a very, very prominent role the Chinese are playing in the cobalt supply chain, especially traders. We visited more than 100 different trading depots. These are kind of small shacks or places that will buy artisanal cobalt. Every single one every one was owned by Chinese.
Mm.
So that also gives you a sense for the geopolitics and for the involvement of foreign actors. So I think those three things kind of set the scene. And I can talk more to you about the mines themselves and what I saw, but
Of
in terms
course.
of first impressions, those were the three: Chinese presence, militarization, corruption.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. I can see, I can see. But can you just tell me just briefly about the mines, maybe the names of the mines and what you actually saw, what the situation was on the ground?
Sure. So the mines for cobalt, so first of all, cobalt mines in the Congo are often mining other things like copper or nickel. And sometimes the cobalt is just a byproduct. And there are really two different types of mines. There are the large scale mines, LSM, and these things are massive. If you've seen coal mines in the United States or huge open pit mines in places like South Africa, this looks very similar.
Mhm.
They're highly mechanized. You can't get really access, and there aren't a lot of people working there. And those that are working there are usually Westerners who are trained and working for conglomerates like BHP Billiton or Rio Tinto or Glencore. They're using dynamite. They're using highly sophisticated machines, steam shovels, drag lines. So there's a high rate of automation, high rate of mechanization, and they're fairly well-paid jobs. And the best place to catch a lot of the workers is at a pub when they're done
Mhm.
with their shift if you want to talk to them.
Mhm.
So that's the kind of industrial one. And we did visit, I'd say about a third of the mines that we visited were large-scale industrial mines like TFM or some of the mines in Lubumbashi. And again, there's a security perimeter. You can't get in without permission.
Mhm.
And you don't really see much because most of the mining is underground, well away from your view. So
Mhm.
that's the industrial mines. The artisanal mines, ASM, artisanal scale mining, completely different in every way. You don't have many firms or large scale companies. There's no mechanized equipment, no dynamite, no even support, no ventilation, no emergency care, no support staff, not even protective equipment. And literally, the two types of artisanal mines, the first type is just a hole in the ground.
Mhm.
Imagine digging a hole that you would dig yourself and
Exactly.
dig as deep as you can, and then you climb in the hole and you
Mhm.
keep digging. And what's interesting is these mines, these types of mines, even exist within cities. So you
Mhm.
have people digging up their backyard
Oh.
and putting their mine tailings around their house. You even have stories of pastors at churches digging up the church floor to try to get at the cobalt,
Oh.
underneath schools digging up their playgrounds
Mhm.
because they want the revenue. Um, and so I think these types of mines are usually mined in teams of 5 to 7 people. They're often men, and they're usually young.
Mhm.
Teenagers, sometimes children, but mostly teenagers, people who are 15, 16, 18. And they're mining by hands, and they don't go too deep. So this is another big way in which the industrial mines, which go very, very deep and are high volume, these are low volume, shallow cast mines. You don't go below 10 or 20 meters, if that.
Mhm.
The other type of artisanal mining happens confusingly at the industrial mines, but it's mine tailings.
Mhm.
It's communities living around the area that are going to go through the waste streams from the industrial mines, hoping to pick out things that were missed or things that weren't valuable enough for the industrial actors, but are still valuable in terms of selling some cobalt at the market. And these types of mines, which are illegal, usually people are going at night or they're jumping the security perimeter after dark. And this is where you see a lot of women and children engaged, especially young school children, because they go after school. And
Mhm.
it's a way for them to earn money to pay for textbooks. And you also see a lot of girls and women washing cobalt or doing things like managing dust. So they'll get paid by some of the mining companies to do dust management or other tasks because it's a very dusty place. I mean, you can smell and taste
Mhm.
all of the dust as you get near these facilities. And that's the kind of rub of the kind of political economy of cobalt. Industrial mines have hardly any jobs, but
Mhm.
account for most of the volume. And the artisanal mines have almost all of the jobs, but account for a very small fraction of the volume.
Mhm. Mhm. Oh, I see. I see. Well, thank you very much for that. I do get the picture of what's happening on the ground. I was talking to one other professor who did a research in the Congo who was saying that when the United States talks of the Green New Deal, it should bear in mind the people that are behind the extraction of cobalt in the Democratic Republic of Congo, how the conditions that they are working under, and so forth. So now let's get to your article, The Political Economy of Cobalt Mining in the Democratic Republic of Congo. What can you give us a brief synopsis of the article and what you possibly consider to be its central argument, if not arguments, if they happen to be many?
Sure. So the central premise of the article was really to capture the lived experiences of what it's like to be a community or a few miners, people who are actually employed in the sector, as they go about their lives. And I think in doing so, it's meant to get a more complex picture of their daily routines, because it's not only a matter of exploitation and child labor and environmental destruction. You have a lot of the media and groups like Amnesty International talking about how the Congo is so horrible, people are forced into forced labor, and we have to kind of get rid of cobalt.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other side of that, which is mentioned in the article, is there are a lot of benefits that these mining streams bring, even the artisanal ones, in terms of opportunities, skills development, revenues, community livelihoods, and in their own way at reducing poverty. And so it's not as simple as mining is good or bad. It's very complex. And that's why the article was called The Precarious Political Economy of Cobalt, because
Mm-hmm.
it still brings a lot of benefits. And a lot of the people who are doing artisanal mining think it's by far the best thing they could be doing. Best in terms of raising money for themselves or sending money back to other family members. And it enables them to move to a part of the Congo that is far more stable than other parts,
Mm-hmm.
like Kivu, or where they mine for gold. Also, the cobalt is not a conflict mineral. So it's not one of the mineral streams that are helping feed militias in armed conflict that
Mm-hmm.
happen in other parts of the country. So in a way, it's kind of like one of the safest things you can mine. Um, and it helps a lot of children and even families generate savings that they then use to pay for school or for healthcare or to support their family in other parts of the country. So I think that's the central premise. The mining has perils, but it also has promises. And the trick is trying to design policy regimes that capture the promises and avoid the perils.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So now let's look at you raise a very important issue that, it's the mining that many of these ordinary people are able to engage with, primarily because it's not necessarily a conflict mineral and many people can manage to extract it. So do you think that uh, extracting this resource has changed the lives of these ordinary people? I'm sure I've heard you say that you had the opportunity to meet some of the miners in the bars when they are done with their mining. Were you able to get the picture that the mining is able to transform their lives fundamentally so that they can live happy, prosperous, and fulfilling lives?
Yes and no. I think it depends on the mine. It depends on the mining team. And I didn't just manage to see a lot of these kind of industrial miners in bars. We also were able to see many artisanal mines. I got to visit myself about 10 of them. And again, some of those mines seem very well done. You have people who are trying to build a little bit of structural support. They're maybe wearing masks, they have a respirator. They seem like they know what they're doing. They equitably share their benefits, and they pay off the police maybe a little bit, so they're nice and safe and secure. So
Mm-hmm.
for those types of arrangements, I do think that mining has a lot of value for those communities. And I got to meet some of their families, and they have many children, and their wives seem happy, and they seem to be kind of upper middle class
Mm-hmm.
for what you would say the Congo is. This is like one of the best jobs you can have. It's like being a professor or an
Yeah.
engineer or a doctor, right? In other
Mm-hmm.
places in this part of the Congo, to be a cobalt miner is seen as that level of prestige.
Mm-hmm.
However, I also saw other mines that were not so good, mines that were using exploited refugees, mines that were kind of taking advantage of children. We saw some of the traders beat children in front of us. We saw them steal their cobalt, take it without having to pay for it, or giving them unfair prices, and then threatening to call the police if they wouldn't accept the prices. So you
Mm-hmm.
also see a lot of exploitation. And
Yeah.
I think in those situations too, also in some of the gender dynamics of mining, where often you can see women who are getting disadvantaged within some communities. The women are given the worst jobs. They have to wash, they have to clean. whereas the men are given the easy jobs, or the women work twice as long as the men. So I also think there are ways in which mining can entrench exploitation and worsen patriarchy. So there's the two extremes. It can do both. It can empower some, but it can also disempower others.
Other people, yeah, I get that. I get that. So apart from the interviews, what were your sources for the article?
Well, we used three, I guess 3.5. So the first one was expert interviews. So this wasn't when we went to the Congo. This was talking to people who are global experts on mining, as well as energy security, all the way around the world, including at the Colorado School of Mines, the International Energy Agency, some of the consulting firms who are doing minerals intelligence, and other professors, people who really know their stuff, people also at think tanks. The second method was community interviews. And this is what I was just mentioning. This is where you go and interview the miners, mining police, the mining bosses, maybe some of the local regulators. We got to meet members of the mining association. And then the final thing that we did is called naturalistic observation, which is a fancy way of saying we just sit and we observed. And the idea is, in an interview, you're going on what people say. So you're revealing their stated preferences. But what they sometimes say could be wrong. Maybe they forgot, or maybe they're ashamed, or maybe they don't want to give you a very difficult answer. Yeah. And so the nice thing about naturalistic observation is it doesn't ask. You simply observe. So you go to a mining site and you kind of sit in the corner and you watch. And this way you're not dealing with things that are stated. You're dealing with things that are revealed that directly from observing people's behaviors. So I'll give you an example. We could meet someone from a mine who says, our mine is the best. And that's what they say in the interview. And then you go do naturalistic observation and you observe, this mine is not very good. They're not, look at their water use, look at the acid, look at the dust, look at that structural support. So it's a nice way of your naturalistic observation can give you a different picture than the interviews. And that's why we really liked using all three methods together, because they do triangulation. They help give you a more complete picture when you do all of them. And the half method that I mentioned is just a literature review, where we read as many studies as we could and reports about cobalt mining, and also just mining and extraction in the Congo, which is a very complicated picture. So those were our methods: a review, expert interviews, community interviews, and naturalistic observation.
Wonderful, wonderful. That was great. So looking at the literature that is around the political economy of cobalt mining, what would you say about your article? What contribution does it make to that existing body of literature, and possibly does it have any conventional interpretations that it challenges?
I think we can make the case that it has three contributions, different levels. I think the first one, and the one that closest to my heart, is it helps humanize the experiences of these miners. Right? These are real people, and these are families, and these are children, and they're struggling, right, to make a life for themselves. And they're struggling to do it in a sector that we all depend upon for our high-tech devices. So I think the first thing we wanted to do, which I think we did, is through our interviews, through our experiences, through the photographs we took, to humanize and show you what it's like to be one of these miners or these mining communities. I think the second thing we wanted to do, and this is a section in the paper, is contribute to policy. So we do have, based mostly from our expert interviews, a set of recommendations that the government could do, the Congolese government, that technology firms could do, people like Apple or Samsung, the actions that mining companies can do, like Glencore, and even things that the European Union or the OECD, because they have principles of standards for labor and child labor, all of them can do stuff. And we have a set of recommendations, about 20 recommendations, that tell you how you could make mining more equitable, safer, and more sustainable. So that was obviously geared towards changing policy. And the final contribution, this is one that I think maybe is the more conceptual. People often ask, well, if cobalt mining is so bad, why do people do it? How do they get trapped into this lifestyle? And I think that's really what the title of the article is meant to capture: the precarious political economy. Its precariousness means changing the political economy either way, giving the miners more rights, giving the miners less rights, increasing cobalt production, decreasing cobalt production, increasing the price of cobalt, decreasing the price of cobalt. If you go in any of those directions, someone has something to lose.
Yeah.
And so it's a really nefarious political economy, because changing the system in any direction will dispossess someone, whether it's a firm, an investor, a financier, a form of labor, or a community. Someone will lose. And that's why it's a very dangerous political economy. And we wanted to reveal those trade-offs with the article.
Wonderful, wonderful. I love that you raised the point that one of your primary objectives was to provide policy recommendations for the government and for the multinational corporations that are engaged in cobalt mining in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So now, you know, from the research that anybody can do, one can notice that the Democratic Republic of Congo is one of the countries in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, that has got the poorest of people living below the poverty datum line, struggling to live a quality, a good life. There are so many problems that the population is facing. But we are looking at a country that has got over 65% of the global's, of the world's cobalt that is used significantly by most of these high technology companies. You've mentioned Samsung, you've mentioned Apple. What specific policy recommendations do you give for the government to be able to get money or get revenue from the export of resources, so that it can be able to transform its economy so that it empowers its people?
So we do give a lot of recommendations in the study. Let me just focus on 4. And I like this because the first 2 are actually not recommendations. They're things that you should not do. So they're do nots rather than do's. And those 2, we were challenging a huge amount of literature that has said the 2 things that we think you should do are to formalize artisanal mining and to improve traceability of the supply chain, and potentially ban child labor. And what we've said is you should do neither of those 2 things. If you try to formalize the economy, you only risk increasing levels of corruption and dispossessing what little resources these mining groups have left. And this gets a little bit into the history of the Congo, where they used to have a state mining company called Jeka Mines, which used to employ, I think, up to 100,000 people. And now it employs almost no one and is entirely looking at joint ventures with the Chinese. So we don't think formalization will work because a lot of people don't trust it. They don't have the skills for it. And I don't think the government has the capacity to do it well. The other recommendation people give is traceability, so you can guarantee that there's no child labor. And I think there it really falls apart, because it's very difficult to trace supply chains, because you see artisanal miners selling their products to industrial traders. So the artisanal supply chain, which involves child labor, gets included and amalgamated into the industrial supply chain. And I think that the last thing you want to do is start to outlaw forms of child labor, because in many ways it's the only lifeline these children have for things like medicine, health, and many of them aren't actually being forced into it. Half of the people that we met who were doing child labor were with their families. So it's not like it's some orphan who's being coerced by a soldier to mine in some camp. Instead, it's like it's a young child and his sister working with their mom and dad on the weekends to collect cobalt. So it's child labor, but with parental supervision in ways that I don't think are necessarily damaging their human rights. So I think those are the 2 things, the 2 shocking things that we think won't really work. The best 2 recommendations that I would have for the Congolese government, the first is to do more partnerships with artisanal miners. Their current strategy is way too outward focused. It's way too much on foreign actors like Australia and China. And all of the joint ventures and public-private partnerships they've done have been global. They have done almost nothing internally with the artisanal mining groups. And I think these artisanal mining groups feel excluded. It's very hard to get mining concessions and licenses. And I think many of them are below the poverty line. So it wouldn't be too hard to create more joint ventures that go inward with these mining communities, giving them better rights, giving them better resources, giving them better access. so they don't have to mine illegally and always be worried about getting caught by the police. The second thing that I think is very obvious is just better implementation of mining standards in the Congo. On the books, women aren't supposed to mine. On the books, all of the mines are supposed to be safe, have structural supports, have ventilation, and have PPE, personal protective equipment. In reality, none of the artisanal mines that I saw did that. All of them had women there. None of them had structural supports. None of them had ventilation. None of them had PPE. So clearly there is a very huge gap between the law on paper and its implementation in practice. And I think it's a pretty progressive mining law. It just needs enforced. And if they were to enforce it and help train artisanal miners, give them basic equipment, give them medical care, give them education, you would see a meaningful improvement in their daily lives.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Professor Benjamin Sovacool, thank you very much for your participation in this interview. This is the platform where I get to sit with academics, established academics, to get to discuss their outstanding publications so as to popularize journal articles, books that are in existence, recent publications, and so forth. Thank you very much for your time and have a good day.
Oh, you're so welcome. Have a great day. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.